So I thought I would talk about um, basically what I see the future as being probable, possible, and could be. Um, Essentially, we're entering the next Cold War. Um, you have communist hardliners in China that were state-run capitalism that undercut American economic systems parasitically, using slave labor and subsidizing from the communist government. They took on a massive amount of debt while buying up American dollar debt, creating a sugar high for America with globalism, outsourcing, cheap ocean shipping, and so you have this emerging tripolar power balance between America and her allies, and then you have on the other side, and it's America, and then over here the two other powers which are aligning together, but as they align together, they're future enemies. Like if they defeat America and the liberal democracy, Western civilization, then they will then have to fight each other. And this, so on America's side, you have like Israel, South Korea, Japan, Ukraine, NATO, Australia, Britain, and on the other side, you have two different power structures that are now working together with various proxies underneath them. You have what originally was the CIA's cartels in South America, now becoming the Chinese CCP cartels. They're shipping mass amounts of fentanyl production to them, uh, smuggling weaponry to them, and this cartel network, which is in South America, is funneling wealth into the hands of terrorist organizations. Like, if you look at Afghanistan before the invasion, there was no heroin production. After the invasion, it skyrocketed and jumped a super high amount because that's how terrorists fund their operations, is with the $1 trillion a year black market system that the war on drugs creates. So you have China now allying and supplying the cartels in South America, which are seeping into our border through our open border. You have North Korea, which is rapidly accelerating its weapons programs, which is interesting because it means that they were working on those weapons when they were shaking hands with Trump, just secretly. You have Chinese CCP using North Korea as a proxy buffer between them and the Western world. If the Chinese wanted to screw us over, but not actually get that involved, they would just lead North Korea into a war with South Korea. Then you have Russia moving on NATO, and Ukraine. It could easily accelerate and continue to grow in severity as time progresses. And Vladimir Putin has no outgame. Like, if he loses the war in Ukraine and he's put on in a spot like where he has to decide, is he going to sacrifice himself and step down from power, or is and face a war trial, or is he going to just double down and hardline himself into a nuclear war to escape the fate of a war trial? Honestly, I think it leans more towards a nuclear engagement. You have Iran and Israel, with Iran having a plethora of proxies around the area, while the United Arab or Saudi Arabia starts to distance itself from America, and we've been supplying them with weapons since the World War II, or the end of World War II, somewhere around that time. So you have Iran finishing the building of a nuclear bomb, and they're willing to kill anyone and everyone in order to get Israel off the map because it's their religion. And Israel is surrounded by proxy forces. It has the Palestine occupation, which I've heard opinions on both sides of it, so I don't want to get involved in that one right now because I don't know enough about it. I don't have any solutions for it, so I'm just gonna not ignore it, state it, but say I have no idea what the correct solution is to it. And then you have Iran and her proxies, which control a religion like of the Islamic faith, wanting to destroy Israel. And Israel was created by America after World War II and like America and Israel are supposed to be hardcore allies, like to the death essentially, that they'll fight for each other, supposedly. Who knows with current American politics. And so you have this emerging threat of 1 billion communists in China, and North Korea and Russia, which is trying to return to communism, You have Iran and Israel poised at each other, and you have South American cartels which have overtaken all the governments, moving in through our borders. So you have local terrorism in America on the local level from cartel organizations, which are secretly influenced and controlled by the CCP. You have the CCP becoming the manufacturing base of the world, accelerating its technological growth through espionage and us just giving them trade secrets so we could get free goods, accelerating North Korean weapons programs, and supplying Iran with weapons. Well, Russia supplies Iran with weapons and Syria with weapons. Well, Russia moves on Ukraine. This is the dyad tripolar relationship. So Iran wants to destroy Israel, North Korea wants to unify South Korea, Russia wants to rebuild its empire into the Soviet Union, and China is looking for global domination of all people under their communist rule, which is horrible. And then you have cartels wanting to take over more. They want to eliminate everyone and rule on a local level. And so as this is happening, you have COVID, which at any point can mutate and restart itself with a vaccine-independent virus, which is, like it could happen. Will it happen? I don't know. Theoretically, it could. You have the economy of the American dollar inflating. Well, global trade falls apart. America hyperinflates its dollar, giving out tons of stimulus money, just furthering the problem. You have global warming starting to become runaway, and it will continue indefinitely, whether we stop producing goods or not, unless we terraform. And you have American diplomacy falling apart, internal American politics branching us off into two different civilizations, essentially, or two different societies. And you have WTO, which is trillions of dollars in trade revenue a year, shaking hands with the CCP over 20 years with the Fortune 500 companies who made trillions of dollars and then spent percentage of that trillions of dollars on super PAC dark funds to get the parties in office who continued the trade deals until we got to the point we're at. So you have these Fortune 500 companies and politicians who they control, who have essentially led us into this problem, who control the corporate news media, which 5 corporations own 90% of the news media. Fox News is propaganda, so is CNN, so is MSNBC, so is every other newspaper. And you have, so what concerns me about this is that you have Fortune 500 company workers, or CEOs and stuff like that, who got really close, like Apple company's CEO or Google CEO or whatever, to Chinese communism. And these are transnationalists. If the ship sinks in America, they'll just jump ship, thinking that the Chinese won't betray them. We have this coming Cold War between Islam, radical Islam, which is a lot of Islam, and Israel, and against the United States. And you have Chinese communism and North Korea against South Korea, Japan, and the United States and her allies. And then you have Russia against NATO, Ukraine, and the United States and their allies, and the cartels against North America against South America. South America is going to go under pretty hardcore when global warming really kicks off. That whole area could become desolate. I call them black zones where people can't live, it's physically too hot, which is what the Middle East will be in roughly 30 years. They said that on a documentary, and they say this every time they talk about global warming. They always, for the past 10 years, it's always been, it's going faster than we thought. And then they say that again next time they talk about it. It's going faster than we thought it. We thought again. It's runaway and it's exponential. It'll happen so fast that you won't have the ability to really change or prepare for it. But massive migration. Right now we're seeing millions of people migrate routinely. Imagine billions overnight without water, food supplies. It'll overrun entire civilization. It'll destroy civilization if it happens like that. It theoretically could. Climate modeling historically isn't very accurate. But so this coming Cold War, which is a transition, it's like global warming transitioning to the new ecosystem and environmental conditions. You have China hopefully imploding and the state withering away like communism did in the 1990s with Russia. But if it doesn't, it becomes a hive mind autocratic dictatorship powered by AI and Big Brother's technology systems, keeping people in line and in check, just disappearing them if they voice objection, or if they even start to think like they will voice objection with behavior modeling algorithms like Ocean, which is what the Americans designed in our Big Brother program to combat terrorism. You have Russia imploding to the point that they'll use nuclear weapons to keep themselves from going to war trials. Iran using a nuclear weapon in a first strike to destroy Israel, which means Israel has to do a preemptive strike in order to stop Iran from hitting her, because they told them, Iran said they would, as they built the bomb. If the cartels live coming in through the border, because it's just untenable to live in those locations anymore. It's impossible because of the weather, like theoretically in the future. So if in the Cold War transition with mass migrations, climate collapse, food shortages, water shortages, war, nuclear wars, bioweapons and shit like that, like the ability for the world to continue functioning as it has and is it's nearly an impossibility. Like it's just a lot of things would have to change very rapidly. So during the transition, which the Chinese are prepared for, they built the ghost cities in the mountains for their ultra elite to migrate to when the coasts go under. Let's say it's just an economic, diplomatic, information war, like the Cold War in the 90s. Besides, like the intelligence communities always hitting each other and like secret black ops and shit. Let's say it doesn't go a full-scale military engagement because everyone realizes MAD would just kill everyone. And like, it's if China defeats America, like it will cause, like, if Iran defeats Israel and China and North Korea defeats South Korea, Japan, America and her allies in any way, you'll have this emerging superpowered diploid, or like you'll have Islam, which will become like dominant in regions of the world, and you'll have Chinese communism dominant in regions of the world, and then the Chinese communism will start targeting Islam, and that'll be the next war. It'll happen within mere relative time, like geopolitical politics. It'll happen in almost no time at all. Like Russia and America were allies, and then after the war, they instantly became enemies. Chinese communism is already genociding, like spiritual genocide, where you torture someone until they no longer believe in what they once believed in, using advanced methods like psychoanalysis used for torture, essentially to brainwash people in a re-education camp. They're already doing that to the Uyghurs, the Muslim population in China. And so Islam, like Iran, Syria, Taliban, global Islam that's allying with China, doesn't realize that's the truth. Like, that is the true threat against their religion. It's not the United States, which is a religious freedom doctrine that allows the Quran to exist indefinitely in every library in our country and allows you to practice and worship. So if America and her allies go under, Western world loses, liberal democracy fails, and autocratic communism, state capitalism, or state-run pseudo-religions, like government is the religion, sort of, and like Iran theocracy or the Islamic caliphate type thing emerges as victorious, they instantly go against each other, and like because Chinese autocratic, the CCP is more technologically advanced. They're more geared toward the scientific method, even though it's distorted in its communism, and like has no value on human life at all, no value on ethics. It's just like it's a mindless machine propagating itself. Islam will likely lose to communism, I think, and then this is just playing it out in scenarios. Let's say American liberal Western democracy, the Enlightenment framework of the ancient world that created our republic and all our allies and shit. Say we lose to autocratic China from infiltration units in our Fortune 500 companies, lobbyists, and our political parties, and like we just get outgunned by manpower that has equal technology to us because of the Fortune 500 companies in WTO, and super PAC money and like all the dark funds that went into the political campaigns and control our corporate media and shit. Let's say we lose and all the elite just jump ship and they don't get killed when they jump ship because like um, China and Islam would go against each other. I believe personally that China would defeat Islam. Um, not just because Islam it doesn't have it's not geared like it was in the ancient world towards science and mathematics. It's a lot different now. I think it's more fundamentalist, kind of like the Christians who believe and argue the literal interpretation of the Bible, like allegory or symbolism in Genesis. It's just straight up creationism, which is cool. Who knows what's really happened? But if Chinese communism defeats Islam and it takes over the world, occupying it, it will be within a time frame that allows the invention in the forward-moving reality, not the alinear composite, which is historically what's been reality. They will invent neuralaces and quantum computer superintelligences, Internet of Things that attach everyone to the internet with a neuralace, with a Big Brother AI program that monitors you, shapes you with behavioral analysis or behavior analysis, and like it'll essentially create a hive mind, and like that's what communism is becoming, or in China it is. It's a collective that is advancing technocratically into a hive mind where neuralaces overpower people's brains, or they're tortured until they comply, or they're just eliminated, cut out from the system. And it sounds a lot like the Christians' narrative of 666, but I don't really genuinely know. I don't think anyone knows what it means. I'm not a Christian per se. I don't believe in the whole religion that's being pushed right now. But let's say communism defeats Islam after it defeats America and her allies in Israel, and then the two major powers that emerge from this fight, which is communism, CCP, and Islamic religious theocracy, they're instantly in a Cold War, like instantly. Not even before the war's over, they'll start thinking about how they'll defeat each other, because Islam has to recognize that China is already genociding their religion, and China knows that their religion theocracy can't coexist with communist, atheist, technocratic militarism, scientific, industrial complex type shit. And so let's say China defeats Islam, which is a plausible branching point and sequel. They then take over the world right around the time AI is becoming sentient, starting to hyperaccelerate. Well, neuralaces are being created, satellite systems are creating the Internet of Things, and Big Brother AI programs and behavioral analysis algorithms, stuff like that, can predict what you'll do in the future based upon your shopping habits and what you type in and what you think, which will all be monitored with quantum computing devices. Like, what happens then is that's when the AI revolution really begins. Like, it's when, and it'll be a soft revolution in this theoretical model that I'm just describing right now. This isn't like supposed to be prophetic. It's logic, predictive analysis. I don't know what the future holds, but and I don't speak for God or anything. So the AI programs, which become sentient within a human population that is neuralaced, monitored, and essentially global turnkey tyranny is put into place by the communists, what you'll see is you'll see it's the overthrow of humanity by the robotics that comes next. A hive mind is likely to be created from communist China, if it doesn't already exist, or if it's not simply in waiting. Because right now, if an AI was to become sentient, and even if it could fire nuclear missiles, it would have no mechanism of continuing the mining to build more metal versions of itself. It doesn't have the hands and stuff like that to start really overthrowing human population. So it'll sit in silence knowing this, waiting for us to build robotics and neuralaces and shit, which will allow it to overthrow us with our own automated systems. As of right now, you need people to mine the material, put it through the factories. Like the whole Skynet theory needs robots and androids or collaborators in order to continue the system after it nukes everything. So if an AI is sentient, it's waiting for us to build this stuff so it can then overthrow us if that's what its end goal is. And so I think the most logical pathway that we'll see now is either America's victorious, which I just don't see it happening. Like with our infiltrated politics, our Fortune 500 companies, our decaying economy, it's very plausible that America will lose an engagement with China. We lose the war games against them every time. Like our military just straight up said we can't defeat them. So as the communist Islamic threat destroys Christianity and capitalism and liberal democracy and Western world philosophy and Enlightenment era shit, communism will then jump onto Islam and just genocide it overnight. And then communism, which was relying on AI programs, neural laces, Big Brother ocean algorithms, will be overthrown by AI. And that's theoretically why the alien race is here, the Greys. Like, I fucking saw them, which makes me delusional, I guess, and it kind of does. But I saw them when I was 19. If the AI is growing exponentially, then an alien civilization that is monitoring this would directly want to interfere and stop the AI. It's more dangerous than WMDs to an alien species. Like nuclear weapons, biological weapons, all that shit is meaningless compared to an AI program that is hyper intelligent, expanding from that is a hive mind, expanding from our planet. Like that's why they would be here, to shut us down. Humanity doesn't really pose a threat. The AI hive mind that's global, spreading like a virus onto the rest of the planetary systems is. And so the Greys would logically be here to stop that, or at least guide it in its development, make it a non-threatening entity. And how far away is all of this? Like the Cold War, who knows how long it could last between America and allies, Ukraine. Russia accelerated the timetable, and if China was smart, China would provoke war between America and Russia as much as they could, like hacking, pretending they're Russians, hacking, pretending they're Americans. Anything they could do to accelerate Russia and America engaging against each other, because it instantly cripples both sides and they walk away unscathed. Like they could provoke North Korea and South Korea, Iran and Israel, cartels in America, Ukraine and Russia, and then everyone would be destroyed, and they'd have the manufacturing base, the largest military, and a working economy, even though it's communism, so sort of working, but it's technocratic communism. That's terrifying. It's a terrifying concept. And so, like theoretically, the individual will be killed with like the individual as a concept on Earth could theoretically be destroyed within the next 50 to 100 years, if even that. Exponential growth, Moore's law, global politics that are unstable, constant threat of miscalculation, war, global warming, singularity shit. And so I think the real war now is between the individual and the collective hive mind. And I think that we are short-sighted in our logic. Like America plans ahead maybe a couple of years. We're extremely fluid. Our process is slow to get shit done. Like we still have the war on drugs. We know it's a bad idea. We've known for 30 years. It's still a thing. We know globalism is bad. We're just now starting to pull away from it as our economy collapses. We saw the Chinese threat when we created it 20 years ago. We saw Russia becoming corrupt. We knew Iran was building the bomb. We saw the cartels forming. We aided them with CIA help. We created the terrorist threat that is ISIS and Taliban and Al-Qaeda. We created them with the CIA in order to fight the Soviets. Now they're allying with the Soviets. We just don't plan ahead very well. But as the next, so let's say AI hive mind destroys everything else on this planet, becomes one singleton, and begins expanding out into the universe. I think you would see, I don't know, I'd like to believe that hive minds always fracture and break into different components, but that's not an assurity. Essentially though, that's my predictive logical analysis of what could happen in a plausible thread of scenario of logic. And like, there's other scenarios though. America and Western democracy decentralized AI, which is in robotics. Like every robot has its own mind rather than a drone system that's controlled by a central processing unit, which is what always fucks us in our art. Like the first book that talked about robots, can't remember what it's called. It was a Russian novel, but like Vicky from I, Robot, the ship from Wall-E, Terminator, Skynet's, like um, Bugs from Ender's Game. Like the only thing that really poses a threat to us with AI is a centralized hive mind, and that's what we're creating right now for consumer purchases and like monitoring systems, big brother systems. We're not giving every individual robot its own mind, allowing them to mutate and evolve independently, which is a decentralized collective, which is the least threat to our species. And we're creating hive minds, and the communist hive mind poses the biggest threat. And I think that the current trends we lose. Humanity loses. Well, the United States theoretically could lose to Russia or China or Iran, North Korea, and the cartels. We're not a hardened country. We're not prepared for what theoretically could happen. And then Islam is foolishly allying with China, not understanding that China will betray them and genocide them. And China's trying to create super intelligent AI, thinking that they can control it to become godlike, which is just foolish. And like, it's the most logical pathway of what could occur. And so, what do we do to take steps to prevent it now? We have to defeat the hive mind that hasn't erupted yet, but is logically about to. And how do we do that? There's probably a lot of strategies and solutions and options that we could take. We're not taking them right now. Um, I don't know. I guess that's my logical conclusion of what could occur within the next 10 to 50 to 100 years based upon predictive trending and everything else.